Nigel, tell me what the process is when somebody has TBD that they can claim.
So basically the way it works is somebody would contact us and say that they've had to stop work. What we start off by doing is finding out exactly when they stopped work so that we can identify the relevant date being the date last worked, okay? And that's critical because that's the trigger for the insurance policy. So what'll happen is that at different times in your different stages, the amount of cover will be different. So obviously we want to look at that. The process we have is we confirm cover, so we identify exactly how much insurance they have. Then we give them sort of an indication about how the process works, what it would involve fees-wise and so forth. And if they're happy to go ahead, then we go ahead and make the claim on the insurance company. If the claim's successful, the process then is that the insurance company will pay the money insured into the superannuation of the client.
Well, I can imagine superannuation not really wanting to give out money. So what happens when you get a rejection from from the superannuation?
Yeah. So basically, obviously every claim is looked at. So what we do is we obviously know what will assist the claim with the support of medical officers and specialists and things like that, as may be the case. But occasionally you do have situations where the insurance company will come back and basically just say we're not paying this claim. And the process there is they issue what's called a pro-fair notice. Now, a pro-fair notice is basically, it's almost like a show cause why we should not reject this claim. And then what will happen is we will then address their areas of concern and try and get that decision overcome and approved. If we feel that the client is genuinely deserving of the payment and it ought to be made, and they continue to push back on it, then the process will actually go to litigation and commence proceedings in court to enforce the client's rights under the contract of insurance. That doesn't happen that often, and obviously our goal is to try and seek a resolution of the money and get the client paid as quickly as possible. And so sometimes might have to give a bit further information or explain some things a little bit more detailed. Sometimes the insurance company will just take an unreasonable approach, and that's when we need to deal with it.
Can you share a story, maybe speaking about when the claim has been refused?
Yeah, well, there's one case that I often think about as a situation where the approach taken by an insurance company was just so unfair and unreasonable. This case involved a lady who had some serious tragedy in her life, and she was employed at the time. And basically what happened was she had quite a severe mental health issue, which was very, very severe initially. And pretty much what happened was she just went walkabout effectively. And so she was just disconnected, and she spent about 9 months where she wasn't in contact with family, she wasn't in contact with her usual people, she wasn't seeing her doctor, she was just travelling around following the guidance of a higher power. And so she was quite disconnected from reality for that period. And basically what happened was that when the claim came to us after another lawyer had commenced the claim and the insurer in that instance had rejected it on the basis that because she hadn't sought medical help in that period that she was effectively gone walkabout, she didn't connect with any medical treatment in that period. So they said, oh, well, there's no link between that and that because ultimately when a doctor saw her, it was so much after the event. And so that was a situation where they basically said, oh, because she didn't seek medical help initially, we're not prepared to accept that was the case, so we rejected it. So she came to us on the basis that the lawyer she had said, I can't take it any further. So that was a case where we were able to sort of dig into it and say, look, here's a series of her Facebook posts. Here's information from her family and friends that showed that she was in no fit state to get medical help, and that's why she didn't get it. And so that was a really good case where, you know, it didn't involve a huge amount of money, but it was a huge amount of money for her, and it was a life-changing amount of money. You know, and she's somebody that I know and that I've come to know through the process, and I know that, you know, she's able to go and buy a car for herself, which is something that she wasn't able to do prior to that. So that was a really, really rewarding case. It was really, you know, great to be involved in that, and it was good to see such a you know, terribly unfair approach taken, and they were prepared to revisit it and come around once we gave them that information. So she was, the good thing about that was that she was at the point where she'd pretty much given up. It was recommended that she contact us, and we said we'd have another look at it, and that was the outcome. It was fantastic.
That's excellent. So that calls for some sleuthing on your behalf.
Yeah. So it's and I mean, the team involved in doing the claim had to sort of think about how can we address this issue, because she hadn't seen a doctor. There's no two ways that was 100% correct. But then digging into it and trying to explain why, and then giving them something that we could say, look, there's the basis for demonstrating that what we're saying is fair and reasonable.
Exactly.
So it was clever on behalf of the team to go to those lengths, I thought.
Yeah. Well, medically, mentally unwell, you know, it's a thorny subject at the best of times.
I mean, and that's true, because, you know, you think of people who have a broken leg or who have a spinal injury or even a brain injury, and it's obvious and people know that it's happened. Whereas when somebody has a mental health issue, it's not always obvious, and people are there's a bit of a stigma attached to it still, obviously, and people tend not to go and get that help that they ought to get. And so, yeah, and look, it makes up a huge part of what we do, are dealing with mental health issues.
Yeah, especially nowadays, I think. It's after COVID and after lockdowns and so on and so forth, and the effect that it had on society.
Yeah, there was a massive upturn in those sort of problems during that period.
I can imagine.
There's always something, though, isn't there?
Yeah. All right. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.